Imagine walking into an old European cathedral, where shafts of golden light filter through stained glass windows and illuminate centuries-old frescoes. High above the pews, you see the image of Adam stretched across the vaulted ceiling. He appears with pale skin and light hair, rendered in the style of Renaissance masters. For many generations in the Western world, this has been the accepted image of the first man created by God. Yet new questions arise. If Scripture describes Adam being formed from the dust of the ground, and if that ground might have been the red or dark earth of the ancient Middle East, could Adam have been a man of darker skin? What does that imply for our understanding of history, theology, and the question of racial identity? We begin by recognizing that the question of Adam's appearance is more than a matter of artistic interpretation. It touches on centuries of religious tradition and social dynamics, and it has profound meaning for how people see themselves in the biblical story. For many years, the Western tradition has overwhelmingly portrayed Adam with a fair complexion. Yet, if the earliest chapters of the Bible take place in a part of the world where complexions can vary from brown to dark brown, then we are invited to reconsider what those first human beings might have looked like. This is not about sowing discord or belittling cultural tradition, but about the possibility that ancient assumptions may have overshadowed deeper truth. In the book of Genesis, we find two creation narratives that have inspired centuries of discussion. First, Genesis 1:26-7:27 highlights humanity made in God's image, though it does not describe physical traits. Then, in Genesis 2:27, we see a more intimate portrait, God forming man from the dust of the ground and breathing life into him. In Hebrew, the word for ground is often rendered adamah, which can imply soil that is red or rich in color. This detail has led some to wonder if the original man, shaped from that earth, might not have been pale at all. Throughout most of Christian history in Europe, however, Adam was shown as a light-skinned figure. Art historians often note that people portray sacred figures as they see themselves, so European artists naturally depicted Adam in their likeness. Yet as research and cultural exchange grew, many began asking whether those images truly reflected the text, or if they were shaped more by European norms than biblical mandates. Some may wonder why it matters if Adam is shown with one skin color or another. One reason is how historically Adam's portrayal was sometimes invoked to suggest whiteness is closer to divinity. That view contributed to colonial ideologies and justified the subjugation of Africans or indigenous peoples, implying that only those resembling a white Adam mirrored God's image. But let us look at the biblical text more deeply. Genesis 3:9-19 reminds Adam that he will return to the ground from which he was taken. That repeated emphasis on dust or earth leads some to suspect Adam's skin might have reflected a darker soil. Others maintain that this language is symbolic of humility, not literal color. We should note that the ancient Middle East was, and still is, home to diverse complexions, often more brown or dark than what Northern Europe portrays. Placing the first humans in a lush region of the ancient Near East makes it plausible that Adam had a complexion darker than many Renaissance paintings. This challenges a deeply ingrained fair skin tradition. Some might argue that references to dust are not meant to suggest color, but to highlight humankind's humble beginnings. Church fathers and Jewish commentators often saw this as underscoring our earthly nature and God's creative act. They emphasized that Adam's significance lay in the divine breath, not in external appearance. Meanwhile, around the world, believers have depicted Adam and Eve in their own ethnic image. In Africa, Adam might appear black; in Asia, more Asian. All can be valid expressions of belonging. Yet the Western tradition has been so dominant that most global portrayals default to a white Adam, which some find exclusionary. Exploring further, we see how religious art and theology were intertwined with colonial expansion. European powers spread Bibles and European-styled Christian art, reinforcing a Eurocentric worldview. Local populations sometimes internalized the message that biblical heroes resembled the colonizers, implying a spiritual or racial hierarchy. Some devout Christians throughout history, of all ethnicities, recognized God's image transcends race. Nevertheless, art can shape subconscious views. When Adam and Jesus are continually shown as fair-skinned, it can subtly imply that whiteness is the standard. It may undermine the sense that non-white believers fully share that divine image. Shifting to a hidden perspective on black identity, we see Africa and Africans appear throughout Scripture. In the Old Testament, the land of Cush, Ethiopia, is mentioned, while in the New Testament, an Ethiopian official is among the earliest converts in Acts. This suggests that African presence in the biblical narrative is far from peripheral. Yet misunderstandings have persisted. Some believed the curse of Ham in Genesis 9 labeled all black people as cursed, but the text never states that. It mentions Canaan, not dark skin. This misinterpretation was exploited to justify enslaving black people, overshadowing biblical truths of equality and inclusion. Many churches did not emphasize the Middle Eastern setting of Genesis, focusing more on theology than geography, leading to a Europeanized portrayal. As a result, non-European believers often saw little reflection of themselves in stained glass windows or sacred murals. This fosters the notion that the biblical world is almost exclusively white. Those who champion a darker-skinned Adam see it as recognition, mending divisions caused by racial hierarchies. If Adam truly had a deeper complexion, it undercuts the claim that one race is privileged in God's plan. Genesis 1:26-27 assures all humans bear the divine image, not just those who resemble European aesthetics. Critics say focusing on Adam's color can become overly literal, diverting from core theology. They note we should not necessarily rewrite centuries of art, nor condemn past artists who portrayed what they knew. The main message, they argue, is that Adam's role points to humanity's humble origin and universal need for redemption. Yet the conversation arises not to spark division, but to reveal unconscious biases. A single depiction, repeated for centuries, can overshadow broader biblical truths. Re-examining Adam's possible complexion invites us to see that traditions are shaped by cultural settings, and Scripture does not specify a pale-skinned first man. Another factor is original language. Dust of the ground in Hebrew can mean earthy soil that might be red or brownish. Adam's name itself connotes a link to that soil. Some Jewish commentaries even propose God took earth from multiple regions, symbolizing human diversity. Either way, the text does not mandate a fair-skinned Adam. Historically, many in Europe had no reason to doubt white depictions of Adam. But as imperial powers spread worldwide, these images were entwined with colonial justifications. Meanwhile, Africans or others who might depict Adam differently were overshadowed by dominant European narratives. Only with growing awareness did some ask if these images were truly biblical. Now, Some believers are more open to the idea of a darker, skinned Adam to reflect the ancient Near East context. This can broaden the sense of belonging for all. The heart of Genesis is about one human family, shaped by one creator, no matter the hue. If the art tradition set Adam as white, it may inadvertently exclude the rest of humanity. Theological voices, especially from African or African American communities, suggest that if Adam was a person of color, it reaffirms dignity for marginalized groups. It also reveals how certain oppressive systems misused a white Adam to prop up colonial or racist agendas. Thus, reconsidering Adam's color can spark healing and justice. People wonder if reimagining Adam leads to rethinking other figures, such as Jesus. For centuries, Western art portrayed Jesus as fair, skinned despite his Middle Eastern origins. Examining Adam can catalyze reevaluation of all biblical imagery, encouraging a more ethnically authentic representation without condemning past cultural expressions. Genesis 1:27 states humans bear God's image, not a specific racial profile. Whether Adam was dark, light, or any hue, Scripture upholds the unity of all people. Insisting on a white Adam can block some from fully seeing themselves in that narrative. So exploring a darker Adam fosters deeper inclusivity and reflection on our common ancestry. Acts 17:2-6 says God made all nations of one blood, affirming that race-based divides are artificial. If a darker, skinned Adam unsettles people, it can also free them from the notion that only one race is close to God. The real message is we share the same origin, regardless of how we imagine Adam's features. Historically, some church leaders saw no problem with a white Adam because it was culturally familiar. Yet, certain groups exploited that imagery to justify enslaving others. Meanwhile, Africans who tried to depict Adam in their own image were overshadowed by Europe's cultural dominance. Only recently have we openly questioned these biases. Today, as we reconsider Adam's appearance, we recognize art is shaped by cultural environments. For Middle Eastern believers centuries ago, a brown, skinned Adam might have felt natural. In Renaissance Italy, a light, skinned Adam seemed normal. Problems arise when one depiction dominates and becomes conflated with doctrinal truth. The conversation invites us to see ourselves in the origin story, free from stereotypes. It can help rectify past exclusions that implied biblical heritage belongs mainly to Western culture. That is why imagining Adam with a darker hue can broaden horizons, allowing all believers to see themselves as descendants of that same divine breath. Teachers can instill this view in the next generation, explaining that biblical figures might have looked different from classic European art. Far from undermining tradition, it enriches it by recognizing that the earliest chapters of Scripture did not revolve around a single cultural phenotype. In so doing, we emphasize universal dignity. Ultimately, the color of Adam's skin should not be a source of division, but a call to reflect on how assumptions shape theology. Each person is fashioned in God's image, a truth overshadowed when we insist on a narrow racial portrayal. By reading Genesis in its Near Eastern milieu, we recall that dust can be many shades, yet life unites us all. African theologians, among others, emphasize that a brown or black Adam reclaims a biblical foundation for communities marginalized by racist ideologies. It exposes how a white Adam was misused historically, offering a step toward healing. Rethinking Adam's tone fosters a more global scriptural understanding. This discussion might expand to Jesus as well, traditionally shown with light hair in Western paintings, yet he was a Middle Eastern Jew. Focusing on Adam can spark re-evaluation of all scriptural figures, gently encouraging historically grounded depictions without castigating old masterpieces. We recall that Genesis 1:27 speaks to being made in God's image, not a certain complexion. A white Adam may deter some from fully embracing their place in that story. Recognizing a darker Adam can highlight the breadth of God's design and affirm that no group is excluded from bearing the Imago Dei. Acts 17:26 similarly attests we are all of one blood, implying a shared ancestry beyond racial divides. If picturing Adam with deeper skin challenges entrenched ideas, it also liberates us from equating whiteness with divine closeness. It affirms that from the dust came all peoples, equally valued. In past centuries, the Church in Europe did not question a white Adam, but certain interests twisted that imagery to legitimize oppression. Meanwhile, the African perspective was often overshadowed. It was only with modern biblical scholarship and a push for equality that serious questioning of Adam's assumed fairness gained traction. Today, as we share this revelation, we see that each culture's art reflects its worldview. Middle Easterners from centuries ago may have naturally pictured a darker Adam. Renaissance Europe pictured him as white. The issue arises when one depiction dominates globally, conflating cultural art with doctrinal certainty. By imagining Adam shaped from darker soil, we can recall that the breath of God animates us all. It calls us to unity and urges us to remove walls built by prejudice. If, for centuries, only white portrayals prevailed, considering a brown or black Adam broadens the scriptural embrace for every race. Some might wonder how this changes Sunday school lessons. The answer is that it can expand them, showing children a fuller picture of how Scripture might have originally appeared. Instead of undermining tradition, it enriches it with a global perspective, reminding all people of their place in God's grand narrative. Certain church fathers and theologians confirm that Adam's color is less vital than his role as progenitor. Yet, if some have used a white Adam to deny others full humanity, we do well to re-examine. Considering a darker Adam humbles us to the text and promotes love that supersedes shallow divisions. Thank you for joining this journey through Scripture, history, and hidden perspectives. If these insights resonate, you can delve deeper into African Christian communities, read about the interplay of art and race, or share with others. We serve a God who cherishes the mosaic of humanity, no matter how we picture Adam's complexion.